Well, hello everyone. Yes, I know this video is late. I had to get my car in the shop. That's how it goes. But on the plus side, new camera. We'll see if this one works out. If you see me, you know that it is. If you don't see me, you know something went horribly wrong with the setup. It looks like it's all good though. So hopefully we'll be able to have video without all the jumping around and flickering and flashing that the other one did that I kept trying to edit out. You know, cutting out the little frames where it did that just because of OCD and for no other reason. I can't really justify the time I put into doing that. It's just something wrong with my brain. But let's get into this video. This one is about depopulation, and I think I've pretty much debunked overpopulation pretty thoroughly in some other videos that I did. But lately we're hearing about going the other way. There are too few babies being born. There's not enough people. Oh no, isn't that terrible? What does that mean? And here we're talking about not having enough people to sustain the progress that the world needs. And I'm not going to go over this article in detail like I normally do. I want to point out the aspects of this that I think everybody is missing, both the overpopulation people and the depopulation people. And I'm not just talking about the fallacies that I've debunked before, like wage fund theory, although those things do come into play. But let's look at what they say first. Given current trends, demographers calculate that the world population will likely peak at just over 10 billion later this century and then start to fall. Why? Because people are choosing to have fewer children. Which sounds a lot like what I said, isn't it? The overpopulation people. Which is that as you get a more prosperous society, people have fewer children. But then there's also the flip side of it, where if you're kind of too overcrowded, stuffed too densely into cities, then it can kind of go the other way. And you have too few children. As a result, the total fertility rate has dropped from 5 kids in the 1960s to 2.2 children now. In the US, it's fallen from around 3.6 in 1960 to 1.6 today, below the population replacement rate of 2.1 children per woman. First problem, replacement rate. You see, the mere fact that this number is 2.1 should be a big red flag. Because ordinarily when you do statistics like this, you do what's called normalization. You make it so that 1 is a consistent growth rate. And to get that, you go through a function where you put in all the inputs and then they all get normalized. So if this sounds like more of an assumption, that's because it is. This is a total assumption because this is really just an average of what they're saying you need based on 2 children per woman, which would be replacing yourself, but then the 0.1 because not all of them go on to have children. But that's an average. Remember what an average means. The average person has 1 breast and 1 testicle. What does that tell you? It doesn't tell you anything. This is going to vary not only between like the first world and the third world. You know, in America where you're much more likely to make it to adulthood, as opposed to the third world where they have 5 kids, but not many of them make it to adulthood. It's not just that, but how many of them go on to have children and when they go on to have children. So all of that figures in. If people are just waiting longer to have children, if they have children at 40 instead of 20 and everything else is the same, your population figures for fertility are going to look like they're going down when they're not. You've still got a sustainable population. If you had a sustainable population before, that's what you have now. So there's a lot of assumptions that go into it. You really want to say, how many women give birth to women who then go on to give birth themselves, based on all the factors that you give. And it's not even as simple as first world versus third world, because even when you're just looking at the United States, this is going to be different if you're looking at the suburbs, if you're looking at rural areas, and if you're looking at densely populated urban areas. And it's really the densely populated urban areas, as I've covered before, that's really driving down that average. But you've got a problem there because that's also highly associated with socioeconomic factors that you'd have to control for, and there's just a lot that goes into it. So this 2.1 isn't really a valid assumption. Of course, they talk about Paul Ehrlich's book, 1968, The Population Bomb, which is where a lot of this overpopulation stuff comes from. The battle to feed all of humanity is over. In the 1970s, the world will undergo famines, hundreds of millions of people starving to death, in spite of any crash programs embarked upon now. Of course, that didn't happen because he was wrong. But he's talking about this book After the Spike by Dean Spears and Michael Garuso. And so they're saying the data tell us that lives are better now than lives were in the past, even though there are many more lives around. Fears of a depleted, overpopulated future are out of date. But then, down here a little further, they go beyond that. They say, without people to do the discovering, innovating, and testing, less creation will happen, less advancement, less progress. A larger future is a future with more total innovators. So fewer people being born means we're not having as much productivity. And so that brings in something else that's not really being considered here. Because if you're talking about people who are producing and innovating, over what span of their lives are they doing that? In the past, for most of this country's history, you basically worked until your 50s and then you were too old to work. When Social Security came out in the 30s, they said 65 as the age to start getting benefits because they figured most people would be dead by then. And now what do we have? We have people who are being productive well into their 80s. So think about what that means. If before you started working in your 20s and you retired in your 50s, that's basically 30 years. What happens now if you keep working in your 50s into your 80s? That's another 30 years, isn't it? So what does that mean? That means that compared to where we started out, everyone is now producing 2 generations worth of wealth for every one person. And that's what they're not taking into account. The more we live longer, healthier lives, the more productive we are. And that's not even considering the fact that we've just made things so much more efficient, both from the wealth of our economy and for the technology. We are so much more productive. You can do so much more with an hour of labor or with $1 of investment or anything like that than you could before. And that efficiency is also what they're not taking into account here. And especially now with AI, I know there's a lot of hype about AI, but AI, when it's treated properly as a tool, can make you much, much, much more productive than you were before. And that's just getting started. And then who knows what the next thing will be and the thing after that. You know, before AI, it was the internet. Before the internet, it was computers. Before computers, it was cars. There's always new things coming along that make us more productive than we were before. And so when you look at it, it's really a free market that allows us to do that. Which Bailey does mention here towards the bottom. The book's biggest flaw is that the authors mostly allied the inception and spread of the crucial economic and political institutions of liberty, strong property rights, free speech, the rule of law, self-government, etc., that enabled the simultaneous increase in prosperity and population over the past 2 centuries. But the point that's being missed, especially when he mentions they're all saying there is no solution, we don't really have this fully prosperous, liberty-based society anymore. I mean, we've still got it to a good amount, certainly more than most people have in most parts of the world throughout human history, but more and more, our government systems, our social systems, all of that is devolving into postmodernism. And I'm wondering how much postmodernism has to do with this decision of people not to have as many kids as before. They do mention something, hang on, let me scroll back up. Because when you're talking about, yeah, here it is, the opportunity costs. As I've talked before, there are different kinds of breeders. Historically, and today in poor societies, you have income breeders, where you just have a baby and then you just use your income as you go to pay for their upbringing, as opposed to capital breeders, which is where you save up a whole bunch of money, and then you raise your children largely on what you've saved. And if you're a capital breeder, that means you're going to take longer to reproduce. You're going to have children in your 30s rather than your 20s or whatever. And again, you need to keep that in mind in the population statistics when they don't. But that doesn't speak to the decision of whether or not to be a breeder in the first place. And that's actually what he's talking about here, which is good. The opportunity costs, what a potential parent would be ready to give up to have an extra child. Higher paying work, longer vacation, restaurant meals, sports, video games. And trust me, raising kids is a big demand. It takes a lot of money and a lot of time for a lot of years. So yes, the opportunity costs are significant. But I think we haven't really answered the question of what would ultimately happen. What happens if we do start having too few people? Because if they're wrong, and it's not a problem, then what are we complaining about? If they're right, and it is a problem, and we start devolving back a bit, then that's going to start swinging things in the other direction. That means that the opportunity costs, the things that you're giving up to have kids, you're not going to have as many of those, and that way you're going to be more likely to have kids, and that'll bring the system back into balance. And that's really what I think it's all about. The more you have liberty, the more you have self-determination, the more you have government staying out of our lives, the more we'll have a prosperous society with as many people as we need to keep it going. You go too far one way or the other, and you start messing that up. So let me know what you think in the comments. Let me know what you think of how the video looks now. And of course, comments for the comment god, shares for the share throne, like, subscribe, and the bell. Sharing videos does so much. Telling people about this video, sharing it, getting clicks, getting it up in the algorithms will get it shown to even more people in YouTube's recommended videos list. That's how you do it. And then, of course, you can keep me going with donate.bogosity.tv. Several ways to support: PayPal, Venmo, cryptocurrency, or becoming a regular supporter. Get these videos early and ad-free, other benefits, so please check that out. Thank you so very much for watching. Until next time, stay strong and be free.